Hello and welcome to Business 360. I'm Shireen Bhan. The headlines that we're tracking for you this evening: a strong start to the week on Dalal-Street. The Sensex up over 700 points. The Nifty reclaims 24,500. Mid-caps rally in tandem with the blue chips. Inflows into equity mutual funds soar 81% in July, hitting a record high of 42,700 crores. New fund offerings mop up more than 30,000 crores. SIP inflows crossed 28,000 crores. Top government officials to brief the Parliamentary Committee on Foreign Affairs after US-India face a tariff war, the highest rate in the world of 50% being imposed on India. The Indian ambassador to the US attempts an outreach with Republicans as he speaks to Senator Lindsey Graham. All eyes on the Trump-Putin summit scheduled on the 15th of August. US and China yet to announce an extension of their tariff deadline as the fragile truce expires on the 12th of August. Beijing had struck an optimistic note on a potential extension. US officials say the ball is now in President Trump's court. In an unprecedented arrangement, semiconductor makers Nvidia and AMD agreed to pay the US government a portion of their revenues from China in exchange for export licenses. Both companies will pay the US government 15% of revenue from the sale of their artificial intelligence chips in China. RBI Governor Sanjay Mehrotra says the decision lies with banks after ICICIBank announces higher minimum balance requirement for new savings accounts but allows exemptions. The governor says that minimum balance is not under any regulatory domain and every bank has its own requirements. Sources tell us that less than 10% of the accounts across ICICIBank's portfolio would be impacted by the move. Block deals continue on Dalal-Street. Private equity giant Warburg exits Home First Finance, raking in 1,200 crore rupees. Promoters and PEs have sold shares worth $2 billion in the last 4 months. Onion exporters set to meet Commerce Minister PiyushGoyal after losing global clients following India's export ban, which was lifted in May last year. Exporters say China and Pakistan have increased their global market share while India's onion exports continue to decline. Lawmakers, including Rahul Gandhi, Akhilesh Yadav, detained as opposition party's leader, marched to the Election Commission office to protest against the Bihar voter list revision drive. The police says the opposition did not have permission for a protest of this scale. The BJP calls the opposition's move a well-thought-out strategy to create a state of anarchy. 5 Al Jazeera staff among 7 killed in an Israeli strike on a tent housing journalists in Gaza. This includes 28-year-old journalist Anas al-Sharif, who had been reporting extensively on the war. Tel Aviv claims he worked for Hamas. Al Jazeera calls the killing of its journalists another blatant and premeditated attack on press freedom. The Supreme Court's orders of the rounding up of all stray dogs in the National Capital Region, moving them to shelters, calls the current situation grim and wants Delhi to be stray dog free, warns of contempt action against any individual or organization hindering the rounding up of dogs. Straight to the day's market action. Dalal-Street started the week on a positive note, led by PSU banks and defense stocks. The Nifty ended the day above the 24,500 mark. 44 stocks closing in the green today. 220 points higher there on the Nifty. The Sensex added 746 points, 505 higher on the Nifty Bank, and the Nifty Mid-Cap Index higher by almost 1% today. So broad-based buying that we saw in today. But the big story from the markets, investments into equity mutual funds surging by 82% to a record high of over 42,000 crore rupees for the month of July. The new fund offers collected over 30,000 crore rupees in the month. Mutual fund data also showed that investors continue to prefer mid and small caps over large caps. Surbhi standing by with the data. Surbhi, new record there as far as equity inflows are concerned. What's driving this?
The inflows for equity mutual funds have hit a record high, the highest ever level. The net equity inflow in this month of July has been 42,672 crores. That's a huge number, and it has overtaken the previous high, which was last year in Diwali, around October, which was around 41,000 crores. So where has all this money come in from? New fund offerings. Over 30 NFOs, and all put together, they have pulled in over 30,400 crores. That's the might of these NFOs. So you'd wonder, what are these new funds? Well, they're across categories. There are lots of thematic funds that have pulled in the money. In fact, 9,000 crores has come in from thematic funds, the likes of HDFC Innovation Fund, ICICI Prudential Active Momentum Fund, and many others. Then there have been new launches in the mid-cap category, in the multi-cap category. For instance, Bajaj Finserv launched their small-cap fund. Franklin India launched their multi-asset fund. And there have been others like the multi-asset allocation, category where Franklin launched a fund. So all of it put together has pulled in huge amounts of money. That's point number one. If you look at the next sort of interesting trend, it's investors' love for mid and small caps. And that really illustrates the point. Look at that. Small cap funds drawing in the highest ever inflows of nearly 6,500 crores. That, is huge in comparison to the 2,100 odd crores that large cap funds have garnered. So clearly the market's preference is towards SMIDs, at least the retail investors. Then let's talk about SIPs. Again, a very heartening figure coming through. The SIP trend is rock steady, and this is also a record high. Last month, June, the number was over 27,000 crores. This month, it's almost 28,500 crores. So even as the market has been sluggish, returns have been tough to come by, investors have been keeping the faith. Last but not the least, an interesting sort of perhaps example of how investors are also getting savvier. They're looking at diversification, asset allocation, which is why this category, which is known as the multi-asset category, this is pulling in more and more money almost on a consistent basis. And this time around, if you look at the multi-asset category, then it's garnered almost 6,200 crores, which is a record high for the multi-asset category as well. All put together, a fantastic month, a month of records when it comes to equity inflows coming into mutual funds.
All right, Surabhi, many thanks for joining us. So a record there for the equity markets. But from equities, let's head to the commodities. Oil prices continue to decline after dropping more than 4% last week. Optimism over a proposed meeting between the US President Trump and Russian President Putin, leading to a possible peace deal in the Russia-Ukraine conflict that has driven prices low. There is, of course, no clarity yet on what that meeting will entail. The meeting scheduled between the two presidents has also weighed on gold prices. Safe haven demand also dented as investors wait for the U.S. inflation reading, as well as clarity from the Trump administration as far as tariffs on gold bars, etc. are concerned. Now, top government officials are set to brief the Parliamentary Committee on Foreign Affairs days after the U.S. hit India with 50% tariffs. President Trump has alleged that India was fueling Moscow's, and I quote, war machine by buying Russian oil. The Indian ambassador to the U.S., Vinay Quatra, has spoken to Republican Senator Lindsey Graham as the government attempts an outreach with lawmakers close to the White House. Parikshit is standing by now to explain where things currently stand. Parikshit, it's important that Vinay Quatra, the Indian ambassador to the US, is speaking to Lindsey Graham because Lindsey Graham has been at the forefront of this business of tariffing countries who were purchasing Russian crude. So take us through where things currently stand.
Well, this is the second time that the Indian ambassador to the US has met Lindsey Graham. The last meeting happened on Friday. Why is it important? You're absolutely right. Lindsey Graham had called for 100% tariffs on countries like India and China, which purchase Russian oil. Now, India has been trying to explain, Lindsey Graham, that we have a strong energy partnership with the United States, which is only growing. While immediate details of the meetings between Ambassador Quatra and Lindsey Graham were not available, sources say this was about giving a perspective on how India-US energy trade is increasing. India now, at multiple levels, has conveyed to US officials that our oil trade, our oil imports from United States have gone up almost 70% between January and June, year on year. They're likely to go up even more. LNG purchases have doubled. So therefore, India's purchase of Russian oil has to be seen in the right spirit. We started buying Russian oil at a time when there were no sanctions. There are long-term contracts. And India will respect the energy partnership with the US, and this partnership is only going to grow further. So this is what we conveyed to the United States. Having said that, back home, there is an outreach happening with parliamentarians. Why is it important? Because the Foreign Secretary and the Commerce Secretary, two individuals which are really in the thick of negotiations with the US, back-channel talks, will be briefing parliamentarians. This is a confidential session on how India-US trade tensions are panning out, how these tariffs are going to impact India. And clearly, there is hope that there will be some breakthrough with negotiations that are happening right now till the 27th of August. It is also important to know the Indian government is pinning a lot of hopes and expectations from the 15th August meeting in Alaska between President Putin and President Trump. We have welcomed the statement openly through a Ministry of External Affairs statement, and we've said that the statement heralds the possibility and potential of peace in the region, which is everyone's wish. And the Prime Minister Modi, has always said this is not an era of war. So let's see what happens. This is going to be a very crucial week in terms of India-US ties, in terms of a breakthrough in negotiations, and possibly even having some sort of interim trade arrangement.
Yes, let's see what happens. And of course, remember, as per the previous conversations, the US officials were supposed to be in India, or are supposed to be in India, around the 25th of August. As of now, we are given to understand that that plan holds. But of course, our colleague Abhimanyu Sharma is tracking that story. Now, Tesla has opened its second showroom in India, this time in Aerocity in the capital. This has come right after the EV maker opened its first showroom in Mumbai. The Delhi showroom is equipped with 4 supercharging units. The Aerocity site will also function as an experience center where people can experience the product. The 90-day trade truce between the US and China ends tomorrow, and neither country have announced a formal extension yet. China had said that both sides will work towards extending the tariff truce by another 90 days after officials met in Sweden, which was last month. Now, US negotiators have put the ball in President Trump's court. There is no indication from him yet on whether he intends to extend that 90-day period or not. Some reports suggested that it will perhaps be extended, but there is no confirmation yet. Semiconductor makers Nvidia and AMD have agreed to pay the US government a portion of their revenues from China, this in exchange for export licenses. Both companies will pay the US government 15% of revenue from the sale of their artificial intelligence chips that take place to China. The unprecedented arrangement follows Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang's meeting with President Trump. Details of the arrangement and the financial structure still being worked out, is what we understand. Back home, RBI Governor Sanjay Malhotra said that banks can take their own decision on minimum balance for saving accounts. Now, this comes after ICICIBank announced higher minimum balance requirements for new saving accounts with exemptions for salary accounts and pensioners. The governor said that minimum balance is not under any regulatory domain, and every bank can arrive at one basis their own requirement. Take a look.
ये जो मिनिमम बैलेंस की जो बात है, जो मिनिमम बैलेंस का जो आप बात कर रहे हो, वो उसके अंदर में रिजर्व बैंक ने सभी बैंकों के ऊपर में छोड़ा है कि वो किस प्रकार का मिनिमम बैलेंस वो रखना चाहते हैं। तो अब किसी बैंक ने 10,000 रखा है, किसी ने 2,000, कईयों ने माफ भी किया हुआ है, लेकिन ये रेगुलेटरी domain mein nahi hai.
Well, that is the RBI governor saying banks are free to decide on the minimum balance. Now, sources tell CNBC TV 18 that the number of accounts that would have to adhere to these minimum balance norms has been historically below 10% of the total accounts with the bank. So how will this impact ICICI Bank's customers? Ritu's here to explain who is exempt and how other banks compare. Ritu.
Well, this is a clear shift in strategy by ICICI Bank, moving away from mass customers to the relatively more affluent segment by steeply raising the minimum monthly average balance that is required for new savings accounts to the highest that we've seen across any bank in India. We're talking about a 5-fold increase in metro and urban areas to 50,000 rupees. And if this minimum sum is not maintained, there will be a penalty of 6% on the shortfall or 500 rupees, whichever is lower. Now, importantly, this change applies only to new accounts that are opened on or after the 1st of August. So existing customers do not get affected. And also, there are certain accounts which will be exempt from this. So, for instance, all the salary accounts, the pension accounts, basic savings bank deposit accounts, which are no-frill accounts mandated by RBI with a 1 lakh rupee cap on credit, and of course PM Jan Dhan Yojana accounts remain zero balance. Even customers that don't belong to any of these categories, they do have options to avoid keeping 50,000 rupees in their savings bank account. For instance, they could have FDs and RDs with the bank to meet the minimum requirement. Now, while the bank has not officially given any statement explaining the hike, there are various benefits such a move could bring. More stable deposits, improvement in CASA, higher balances at lower savings rates, or more, reduction in cost of funds, more premium cross-selling opportunities, just to name a few. Now, we've heard the RBI governor, ICICI Bank has not broken any rules, but the backlash on social media we've been seeing is understandable because 90% of India makes less than 25,000 rupees a month. And as Chair Kotak points out on X, a 50,000 rupee minimum balance means that 94% of Indians keep all of their monthly income with a bank at all times, or else they face penalties. Now, for perspective, other private banks like HDFC, Axis, Kotak or Yes, they do require around 10,000 rupees minimum balance in urban areas. And then you have public sector banks like SBI, BOB, Canara, etc. that had a zero minimum balance requirement. So as a customer, you do have various options available, but it will be interesting to see if other private banks also follow suit.
Ritu, many thanks for joining us. Now, JSW Cement's 3,600 crore rupee IPO has been fully subscribed on the last day of bids. As of 4 p.m, the total subscription stood at over 7 times. The demand was led by qualified institutional buyers, whose portion was subscribed by nearly 15 times. Retail portion also fully subscribed, while the non-institutional investor portion was subscribed over 10 times. The block deal mania continues on Dalal-Street. Private equity giant Warburg has exited Home First Finance, raking in 1,200 crore rupees. Promoters and PE have sold shares worth $2 billion in the last 4 months alone. Nimesh is here with all the numbers. Nimesh, block deals buzzing.
Well, Indian markets have seen clean-out trades worth $2 billion since the April of this year. When I mean clean-out trades, it's essentially the last blocks either from the promoters or from strategic investors. The first example is Home First Finance. We saw a large block today. Warburg Pincus sold its remaining 10.2% stake in a block deal, and they raised close to 1,250 crores. Again, in August of this year, we saw a big block in Eternal, where Ant Financial sold the remaining 2%, and they raised close to 5,650 crores. Again, in July, we saw a large block in Adani Wilmar, where the Adani Group sold nearly 10.2%. It was a clean-out trade, and they raised close to 3,700 crores. In June, we saw a big block in AB Fashion, where Flipkart sold the remaining 6.2% stake, and they raised close to 600 crores. In May, there was a large block in Paytm, where Ant Financial sold its entire 5.8% stake, and they raised close to 4,000 crores. And last but not the least, there was a large block in RBI Bank in April, and there British International sold its entire 3.2% stake, and they raised close to 430 crores. So cumulatively, as I said, $2 billion of clean-out trades have happened since the April of this year. And if investment bankers are to believe, the pipeline seems to be quite strong in the days and months to come.
Nimesh, many thanks. Block deals buzzing. Members of the Onion Exporters Association are set to meet Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal today. Exporters are seeking the government's intervention. They say they're losing global clients following India's export ban, which was lifted in May last year. Exporters say China and Pakistan have increased their global market share, while India's onion exports continue to decline. Santya is standing by with the details. Santya, take us through what the problem is and what onion exporters are asking for.
So, Shireen, it's been 2 years since the central government first imposed restrictions on onion exports, followed by a ban on exports. But onion exporters are still struggling to cope with the damage it caused. In August 2023, the government imposed a 40% export duty on onion to keep domestic prices in check. Later, in December 2023, a complete ban was imposed on onion exports. This ban was lifted only in May 2024, but the relief came with conditions such as a 40% export duty and a $550 minimum export price on onion. Now, onion exporters say that as the ban was imposed in December 2023, they were unable to renew their overseas contracts, which usually happens in December. They claim that they ended up losing a significant chunk of their global clientele to Pakistan and China, who were quick to fill the gap. As per CRISIL data, before the export restrictions, China's share in the global onion trade was 8% and Pakistan's was only 1%. But once the restrictions were imposed on Indian exporters, China's share in the global onion trade increased to 12 to 13% and Pakistan's share rose to 2 to 3%. As per Indian government data, in 2020-21, despite it being the COVID year, India exported over 15 lakh tons of onion. In 2022-23, it exported over 25 lakh tons. This dropped to slightly over 17 lakh tons in 2023-24 once the export restrictions kicked in. As per CRISIL data, this further dropped to just over 11 lakh tons in 2024-25. According to the Commerce Ministry, overall onion exports, including processed products like dried onion, witnessed a significant drop in the restriction year. Ministry data shows that in 2021-22, India's overall onion and onion product exports were worth $619 million. In 2022-23, they were worth $734 million. But in 2023-24, once the restrictions kicked in, the value dropped to only $180 million. And in 2024-25, it was $230 million. Exporters say the situation has worsened as Bangladesh has not started importing onion from India this season. They say that exports to Bangladesh usually begin by the first or second week of June, but it's mid-August now and exports haven't started. They say that exports to Sri Lanka are also impacted, attributing this to increased domestic production in these countries. As per CRISIL, Bangladesh's onion cultivation has increased by 10% in FY25, and similarly, Sri Lanka's domestic production of red onion increased by 19% and of big onion by 9% in 2024-25. Both Bangladesh and Sri Lanka are important export destinations for India. According to CRISIL, 41% of India's overall onion exports go to Bangladesh and 14% to Sri Lanka. Indian onion exporters are requesting the government to keep all this in mind and support them. They are urging that the ROTTEP, that is remission of duties and taxes on export products rate on onion exports, be increased from 1.9% to 5%, at least until Bangladesh starts importing from India again. The current situation is affecting onion farmers as well. Exporters are buying less produce, and this, combined with bumper production, has led to a massive price decline. Shireen.
All right, Santya, many thanks for joining us. We will take a break, but when we return, the Supreme Court orders the rounding up of all stray dogs in the National Capital Region and says they need to be moved to shelters, calls the current situation grim and wants Delhi to be stray dog free. That and more when we return. The big national story, the leader of the opposition in the Lok Sabha, Rahul Gandhi, and other opposition leaders were detained briefly while protesting against the special intensive revision of electoral rolls in Bihar and the alleged electoral malpractice. The opposition lawmakers were leading a march from Parliament House to the Election Commission's headquarters. The members of Parliament were stopped by police during their march. Some MPs, including TMC's Mahua Moitra and Samajwadi Party's Akhilesh Yadav, were seen climbing the barricades. Others, including Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge, began a sit-in protest at the site. More than 30 MPs, including Congress Party's Priyanka Gandhi Vadra and Shiv Sena UBT leader Sanjay Raut, were detained but released 2 hours later. Police officials say lawmakers were detained as the Election Commission had only given permission to 30 MPs to enter its premises, but the protesters were in larger numbers.
एक्चुअली बात नहीं कर सकते हैं, रियलिटी ये है, क्योंकि सच्चाई देश के सामने है और ये जो लड़ाई है ये राजनीतिक नहीं है, ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन की लड़ाई है, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को बचाने की लड़ाई है, वन मैन वन वोट की लड़ाई है, इसीलिए हमें साफ प्योर वोटर लिस्ट चाहिए।
कांग्रेस पार्टी और ऑपोजिशन ने बहुत समय बर्बाद कर दिया है। अब हम देश का समय और पार्लियामेंट का समय को और बर्बाद होने नहीं देंगे। जब वो अपना नेता तय नहीं कर पाते हैं, प्रतिनिधि तय नहीं कर पाते हैं, फिर इलेक्शन कमीशन से टाइम मांगा क्यों है?
Well, the Supreme Court has issued directions to remove all stray dogs in the Delhi National Capital Region to shelters within 8 weeks. The court has ordered civic authorities in Delhi, Noida, Ghaziabad and Gurugram to build dog shelters immediately. It refused to hear any pleas by animal rights activists, saying that there was no room for sentiment. Ashmit is standing by with the details. Ashmit, take us through the court's order, the directions that the court has given. You know, how is this implementable to say that all of Delhi's stray dogs, including in and around the National Capital Region, have to be removed and moved to shelters in 8 weeks? Does Delhi even have dog shelters?
Well, the numbers clearly not making sense at this point. PETA suggests there are over 10 lakh dogs as far as Delhi NCR is concerned. The Supreme Court for the first 6 to 8 weeks suggesting dog shelters for about 5,000 dogs. So those numbers are not stacking up. Is the Supreme Court suggesting that the Delhi government and the municipal authorities need to shelter and provide for over 10 lakh dogs? That appears to be the strategy that the Supreme Court was trying to go for in what was a sweeping order. The Supreme Court, in quite unnatural proceedings, refusing to hear anybody else other than the Delhi Government Council and the amicus, refusing to hear outright, saying that we will not hear any intervention applications. All the applications, intervention applications, will be dismissed. The Supreme Court saying that now is not the time for confusion. Now is not the time for sentiment. This is the time for action, and that it will not be shy of taking action. In fact, at one point also suggesting that the dog should be wound up, and that use of force is also something that has been permitted by the court in terms of rounding up of these dogs. So that's the broad direction that has come from the apex court. All the street dogs need to be rounded up by the municipal authorities. This is applicable for Delhi, Gurugram, as well as Noida. Further, the Supreme Court has directed for setting up of shelters. Not much clarity there. The number 5,000 came up by way of a submission that came from the amicus. The amicus said that this will be a progressive effort going forward. We'll need to progressively build more shelters. For now, let's give an initial target of 5,000. So that's what the apex court has given, 6 to 8 weeks, dog shelters for about 5,000 dogs. The Supreme Court also saying that there is no situation in which these dogs that have been rounded up can be released back on the roads, can be released back on the streets, and to that end saying that these dog shelters should have CCTV and that the Delhi government should go back to the court disclosing how many dogs have been rounded up on a daily basis. So again, sweeping directions this. One important caveat that the Supreme Court repeated 3 times as a part of its order, saying that while the municipal authorities have been given unfettered powers while they go about rounding dogs, any individual or organization found interfering with their efforts in terms of rounding up these stray dogs will meet the full force of the law, will be taken action against, will be liable to face contempt of court. That was repeated 3 times. So clearly, the Supreme Court not mincing words, expressing its intent, but the implementation of the order, many say, raises a number of questions.
Yes, Ashmit, appreciate you joining us, and we'll, of course, be taking this conversation forward right here on CNBC TV 18. But with that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of Business 360. The news will continue right here on CNBC TV 18. Stay tuned. We're back in a minute with more.